Imagine a silent killer, more than 1.5 miles wide, racing through the darkness at over 40,000 miles per hour. It has no name yet, no warning, just a cold, ancient rock that has traveled the solar system for billions of years, until one ordinary night in late 2029, a telescope in Chile catches a flicker of light that should not be there. They call it Nemesis 1. A 1.6-kilometer asteroid on a collision course with Earth. Impact window, July 17, 2036. Probability, 40%. Target, the middle of the Pacific Ocean. If it hits, the energy released will be hundreds of times greater than the dinosaur-killing Chicxulub impact. Tsunamis will race across every ocean. Billions of lives will hang in the balance. But here's the real question that keeps me awake at night. What if this wasn't just another close call that scared us for a few weeks and then faded from memory? What if Nemesis 1 became the spark that finally forced humanity to do the impossible, to set aside decades of rivalry, suspicion, and geopolitical hatred and build the first true global space alliance? In this alternate timeline, a single rock in the sky does what climate change, nuclear threats, and pandemics could not. It drags the United States, China, Russia, and Europe into an uneasy planetary defense pact. We will watch secret betrayals, heroic sacrifices, heartbreaking launch failures, and shocking discoveries on the asteroid itself. We will see how fragile unity really is when the crisis ends, and how one act of sabotage nearly dooms us all. This is not satire like Don't Look Up. This is the real what if, raw, messy, human, and terrifyingly plausible. If you love deep, thought-provoking alternate space histories, do me a favor, hit that like button right now and subscribe. Let's begin. Before we dive deeper into the alternate timeline, let's step back and look at where we actually stood in the late 2020s. By the middle of the decade, planetary defense was no longer science fiction. It had become, slowly, unevenly, a real, if underfunded, international priority. The turning point everyone remembers is 2022, NASA's DART mission. A small spacecraft deliberately slammed into the moonlit Dimorphos at over 14,000 miles per hour. The impact shortened its orbit around its parent asteroid by 32 minutes, a clean, measurable success. For the first time, humanity proved we could change the path of a natural celestial body. The world cheered. Headlines called it the day we saved the planet. Funding ticked up slightly. Politicians made speeches, but applause fades fast. Apophis, the 340-meter rock discovered back in 2004, had terrified people in the early days. Initial calculations gave it a 2.7% chance of striking Earth in, you guessed it, April 2029. The Torino scale briefly hit level 4, the highest ever recorded for an object at that distance. Media ran doomsday simulations. Then radar refined the orbit. By 2021, Apophis was removed from every risk list. Safe passage in 2029. No impact for at least the next century. The story died. Other candidates appeared and vanished. Bennu, the target of OSIRIS-REx, peaked at a 1 in 2,700 chance of hitting us in the late 2100s, tiny but non-zero. Then it dropped. 2024 YR4, A small dark rock discovered late in 2024 briefly spiked concern in early 2025 when new observations pushed its 2032 impact odds above 2%. Headlines screamed, "Most dangerous NEO since tracking began." Within months, better data pushed it back down. Another false alarm. Detection kept improving. NASA's NEO observations program cataloged over 35,000 near-Earth objects by 2026. The upcoming NEO Surveyor telescope, finally on track for a 2027-2028 launch, promised to find most of the city killers and continent killers we had missed. Europe contributed NEO-MI, a mission designed to spot objects coming from the sun's direction, the ultimate blind spot. China, meanwhile, moved aggressively. Tianwen-2 sampled a quasi-satellite in 2025, and CNSA publicly outlined plans for a full asteroid deflection test by the late 2020s. They weren't waiting for permission. Yet here's the uncomfortable truth. Even with all this progress, global planetary defense remained fragmented. The United States led in discovery telescopes and kinetic impactor technology. Europe and Japan brought precision tracking and sample return expertise. China poured resources into heavy-lift rockets and kinetic interceptors. Russia still maintained theoretical nuclear deflection studies. But coordination? Patchy at best. The UN's International Asteroid Warning Network existed, but it had no enforcement power. Artemis Accords grew, yet excluded major players. Budgets fought yearly battles in Congress, the Politburo, and national parliaments. Climate change, great power competition, supply chain crises, and domestic politics always won. Scientists published papers warning of kilometer-scale objects, the kind that could kill hundreds of millions or trigger global cooling. They begged for more telescopes, more deflection demos, more international binding agreements. Most people never heard those pleas. The news cycle moved on to the next election, the next war, the next heat wave. So when astronomers pointed a routine survey telescope at the southern sky on a crisp December night in 2029 and spotted an unusually bright, fast-moving point of light, when orbital calculations converged on a 40% impact probability 7 years later, when they realized this was not another Apophis false alarm, the world was not ready. Not technologically, not politically, and certainly not psychologically. But this time, the rock refused to be ignored. Next time, the moment everything changed. It started with a routine scan. Late December 2029, the Vera C. Rubin Observatory in Chile, still in its early commissioning phase after years of delays, sweeps the southern sky as part of its legacy survey of space and time. A faint, moving point of light appears in the data stream. Nothing unusual at first. The automated pipeline flags it as a probable near-Earth object. Astrometric positions are fed into the Minor Planet Center. Within hours, follow-up observations from telescopes in Australia, South Africa, and Hawaii pin down the orbit. And then, the numbers stop making sense. By January 3, 2030, the orbital solution converges. This is no Apophis-style near-miss, no 1 in 1,000 long-term risk. This is a 1.6-kilometer asteroid, roughly the size of Mount Everest laid on its side, with a 40% probability of striking Earth on July 17, 2036. Projected impact zone: Central Pacific, near the international dateline. Energy release: equivalent to more than 100,000 megatons of TNT. Global climate disruption: tsunamis reaching 300 meters high along vulnerable coastlines. Billions at risk. They name it Nemesis 1. The announcement does not come from a press conference. It leaks, first to astronomy forums, then to major outlets. Within 48 hours, the United Nations convenes an emergency session of the Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space. The International Asteroid Warning Network activates its highest alert level. NASA's Planetary Defense Coordination Office, ESA, CNSA, Roscosmos, all scramble to verify the calculations independently. They do. For the first time since the Cold War, the 5 permanent members of the Security Council meet in closed session not to argue over borders or trade, but over a rock in space. The initial instinct is predictable. The United States pushes for unilateral action. We have the launch guidons, the heavy-lift rockets, the DART heritage, senior officials argue privately. We can't wait for consensus. Plans circulate for a rapid response kinetic impactor swarm using Falcon Heavy and Starship prototypes. SpaceX offers vehicles at cost, a PR masterstroke. China responds immediately. Beijing vetoes any solo mission in back-channel diplomacy. No single nation decides the fate of humanity, the foreign ministry states publicly. Privately, CNSA accelerates its own deflection test program, originally slated for a small target in the late 2020s, and begins integrating nuclear options into simulations. Russia quietly reminds everyone of its theoretical nuclear standoff expertise. Europe, caught between the giants, calls for a binding multilateral framework. Negotiations drag through the spring of 2030. They are not heroic. They're exhausting, petty, and bureaucratic. Endless Zoom calls, disputes over who pays for what, arguments about technology transfer, the US reluctant to share nuclear design data, China protective of its heavy lift secrets, Russia demanding veto rights over mission profiles. Funding fights erupt in national legislatures. Environmental groups protest the idea of launching nuclear devices into space. Public opinion swings wildly. Panic buying in supermarkets, doomsday preppers surging, memes flooding social media with don't look up references that now feel less funny. Yet, something shifts. By July 2030, 6 years before impact, a fragile document is signed in Geneva. Officially, the Planetary Defense Accord. Unofficially, the first true global space alliance born under existential threat. Key provisions: joint command structure under UN auspices with rotating leadership, pooled resources, US heavy lift and kinetic impactor tech, Chinese landers and sample return expertise, Russian nuclear propulsion concepts, European precision guidance and robotics. Binding commitment, no unilateral deflection attempts. Transparency clauses, real-time data sharing on orbits, trajectories, and mission progress. Emergency funding mechanism, a percentage of global GDP redirected if needed. It is imperfect, full of loopholes, riddled with distrust. But it exists, and for the first time in history, the major space powers agree. If we are to survive this, we do it together, or not at all. As the ink dries, astronomers keep watching. The probability ticks down slightly to 38% as more observations refine the orbit, but 38% is still terrifying. The clock is ticking. Next, the panic, the preparations, and the first cracks in the fragile unity. The signing of the Planetary Defense Accord in July 2030 did not calm the world. It lit the fuse. Stock markets did not crash gradually, they imploded. Within the first week of the official announcement, the Dow Jones fell 28%, Shanghai Composite 34%, FTSE 41%. The term Asteroid Panic of 2031 entered the lexicon almost immediately. Governments imposed temporary trading halts. Central banks flooded liquidity. It barely mattered. People were not selling stocks to preserve capital. They were selling to buy canned food, generators, land in the interior, bunkers advertised on late-night streams. Riots broke out in several megacities over perceived hoarding by the wealthy. Supermarket shelves emptied in hours in coastal regions. Governments rationed fuel and basic goods under emergency decrees.
Temporary rationing of fuel and essential supplies to ensure equitable distribution during the crisis. Emergency decrees now in effect.
No justice, no peace! Disperse immediately!
Conspiracy theories exploded online. The asteroid was a hoax to justify martial law, or a secret weapon, or divine punishment. In some countries, religious movements surged. In others, anti-science sentiment briefly spiked before the nightly orbital updates made denial impossible. And yet, amid the chaos, something remarkable began. Engineers, technicians, programmers, welders, and logistics coordinators went to work with a focus most had never seen in their lifetimes. Factories that had been building electric cars and consumer drones pivoted overnight to produce radiation-hardened electronics, cryogenic fuel tanks, ion thrusters, and redundant guidance systems. Universities accelerated PhD programs in orbital mechanics and nuclear propulsion. Retirees came back to NASA, ESA, and CNSA facilities as consultants. The Accord's joint working groups met weekly, sometimes daily, in heavily secured virtual rooms and occasional face-to-face summits in neutral Switzerland. The first major technical decision was agonizing: kinetic impact or nuclear deflection. Kinetic was cleaner, proven by DART, scalable with Starship-class launchers, but a 1.6-kilometer body required dozens of coordinated impacts to guarantee meaningful delta-V. Nuclear standoff detonation was far more efficient per kilogram delivered, but carried political poison. The Outer Space Treaty banned weapons of mass destruction in orbit, and deflection versus weaponization was a razor-thin semantic line. After 18 months of simulations, they chose hybrid, primary kinetic swarm led by US and European vehicles with Chinese and Russian nuclear insurance options held in reserve and never publicly acknowledged. Launch cadence became the new arms race, but cooperative. SpaceX flew Starship prototypes almost weekly from Boca Chica and the new Australian pad. China's Long March 9 heavy lift vehicle debuted in 2033 with a 150-ton to LEO capacity. Roscosmos revived Energia-derived designs using modern materials. Europe contributed Ariane 6 blocks and the new Themis reusable launcher. But reality refused to be cinematic. A critical 2034 test launch, the first joint US-Chinese kinetic impactor demonstrator, scrubbed 6 times, first for weather, then for a faulty valve, then for an electrical glitch traced to a subcontractor in Poland. Each delay triggered fresh accusations in the press. China is dragging its feet. America is hogging the payload fairing. Diplomats spent more time managing headlines than trajectories. Then came the first real fracture. In late 2035, an American reconnaissance probe, launched under the Accord but funded entirely by DARPA, returned unexpected spectrometry data. Nemesis 1 was not a monolithic stony asteroid. It had a significant volatile-rich core, water ice, ammonia, complex organics buried under a thick regolith shell. Suddenly, deflection was no longer just about nudging mass. It became about controlled outgassing. If the mission cracked the icy interior too aggressively, sublimating volatiles could turn the asteroid into an unpredictable rocket, potentially swinging its trajectory back toward Earth or toward populated lunar outposts. The revelation leaked. Panic returned in waves. But so did opportunity. Mining companies that had been quietly positioning for asteroid resources saw a path forward. If humanity could reach Nemesis 1 and survive the encounter, the volatiles alone could supply water and propellant for decades of cislunar development. Suddenly, the mission had dual purpose: save Earth and open the solar system economy. Espionage followed almost instantly. Corporate spies, state actors, even rogue hackers targeted mission data centers. One particularly ugly incident in 2036, months before the final deflection window, saw a senior Russian engineer arrested in Houston for attempting to exfiltrate nuclear trigger designs. He claimed he was protecting equitable access. The Accord held, barely. By early 2036, 6 massive spacecraft, 3 kinetic impactors, and 3 nuclear-capable standoff vehicles were on final assembly. Crewed rendezvous missions were planned to service them en route. The world held its breath. And then, on March 12, 2036, the lead impactor stack, carrying the international crew that would oversee the terminal guidance, suffered a catastrophic engine failure during the Trans-Mars injection burn. 2 astronauts died instantly in the explosion. The broadcast feed cut to static. Humanity's first truly joint deep space mission had just claimed its first lives, before it even reached the target. By mid-2035, the Planetary Defense Accord had survived 6 years of delays, scandals, budget fights, and one very public fistfight between a Russian propulsion engineer and an American systems integrator at a Houston integration facility. Somehow, it still held. The first truly multinational crewed mission to an extinction-level threat launched on August 14, 2035, from a brand-new joint pad at Kourou, French Guiana, the only site all parties trusted enough to share. The spacecraft, officially designated PDV-1, Planetary Defense Vehicle 1, was a Frankenstein of technologies. Starship-derived upper stage and habitat module from SpaceX, Chinese long-duration life support and landing legs adapted from Chang'e heritage, Russian nuclear thermal rocket core, the controversial insurance option flown without live fissile material for political reasons, European guidance computers and robotics arms. 6 crew members, 2 Americans, 2 Chinese, 1 Russian, 1 French, deliberately balanced to the point of caricature. Mission duration to intercept, 8.5 months. Everyone knew the psychological screening had been brutal. Nobody expected the cultural friction to be quite so immediate and petty. Day 47 of the journey. Routine voice loop recording captured the moment that would later become infamous in training videos. American commander, half joking, "Who the hell put soy sauce in the rehydrated chicken again? This is supposed to be American comfort food." Chinese mission specialist, deadpan, "It improves the taste. You should try it before complaining." Russian flight engineer, laughing, "At least it is not borscht. That would start a real war." French robotics lead, sighing over comms, "Can we please focus on the upcoming mid-course correction instead of condiments?" The bickering was constant, childish, and, in hindsight, life-saving. It kept them human. It kept them talking. When real crisis arrived, they already knew each other's breaking points. March 9, 2036. 3 days before terminal approach. PDV-1 was 1.4 million kilometers from Nemesis 1. Closing at 14 kilometers per second relative velocity. The nuclear thermal engine, Russian design, American-built fuel pumps, Chinese control software, was performing its final long-duration burn to fine-tune intercept geometry. Telemetry showed a sudden pressure spike in the reactor chamber, then a millisecond-long burst of gamma radiation, then silence. The engine bell had failed catastrophically. Molten core material vented into space in a white-hot plume. Attitude control was lost within seconds. The ship began a slow, tumbling death spiral. All 6 crew members were alive for approximately 4 minutes after the rupture. They knew exactly what was coming. In those final minutes, they did 3 things. First, they dumped every byte of diagnostic data, trajectory logs, system snapshots, and personal video messages to Earth via the high-gain antenna, still functional for another 90 seconds. Second, they manually fired every remaining reaction control thruster in a desperate attempt to stabilize the tumble long enough for the antenna to stay pointed at Earth. It bought them 17 extra seconds of transmission. Third, they chose, unanimously, without needing to debate, to keep the main communications loop open until the bitter end. No privacy, no heroic last words whispered to loved ones alone. They wanted the world to hear them stay calm, stay professional, stay together. The final transmission ended with the French robotics specialist saying very
Tell
quietly,
our families he tried, and tell them the view was worth it.
PDV-1 disintegrated against the asteroid's surface at 0347 UTC, March 12, 2036. Impact energy was negligible compared to what Nemesis 1 carried, but the kinetic contribution was measurable. More importantly, the crew's final data dump contained precise, last-second measurements of surface composition and thermal properties that would prove decisive for the follow-up mission. Earth did not have time to mourn properly. Within 72 hours, the Accord authorized an emergency second-chance launch, PDV-2, already in high bay at Kourou as a backup vehicle. New crew assembled in less than 3 weeks, veterans plus the most qualified standbys. They launched on April 2, 2036. This time, there were no live TV send-offs, no grand speeches, just a terse mission patch that read simply, "For Nemesis, for them." PDV-2 reached intercept on July 14, 2036, 3 days before the original impact window. The standoff nuclear detonation went exactly as simulated. 1.2 megatons at 420 meters distance, ablative plasma jet providing the needed impulse. Nemesis 1's velocity changed by 3.8 centimeters per second. Enough. The new trajectory carried it safely past Earth by roughly 1.1 million kilometers at closest approach. But the surface disruption was more violent than models predicted. Millions of tons of regolith and ice were ejected. A narrow stream of debris crossed Earth's orbit. Between July 18th and August 4th, 2036, 214 fragments, most pea-sized, 7 grapefruit-sized, entered the atmosphere. 16 reached the surface. Damage was minimal. 3 houses destroyed in rural Mongolia, a fishing vessel damaged off Chile, a highway cratered in Western Australia. 2 fatalities. Hundreds of millions in property damage. The lawsuits began before the smoke cleared. Insurance companies collapsed under claims. Governments sued each other. Mining conglomerates that had quietly bought asteroid prospecting rights sued for lost commercial opportunity. Conspiracy theorists claimed the deflection had been deliberately botched to justify more funding. And yet, almost unnoticed at first, something else began. The debris cloud contained spectroscopically confirmed water ice, ammonia ices, complex organics, and, most shockingly, traces of native metals at concentrations far higher than any known meteorite. Suddenly, the technologies developed for the mission, precision nuclear shaping, high-thrust nuclear thermal propulsion, autonomous robotic mining prototypes, had commercial applications. By 2038, the first Nemesis-class prospecting missions were already being funded. Private capital flooded back into space, this time not for tourism or satellites, but for raw materials that could end Earth's resource wars. The dead crew of PDV-1 had not just saved the planet, they had, unintentionally, opened the solar system economy. By 2050, the Planetary Defense Accord had morphed from a desperate emergency pact into a sprawling, permanent institution, the Interplanetary Alliance Council, or IAC. What began as a handful of joint working groups swelled into a bureaucratic leviathan, thousands of committees overseeing everything from orbital traffic control to resource allocation protocols. Budgets ballooned, with member states committing 0.5% of GDP annually. Critics called it the UN in space, slow, ponderous, riddled with vetoes. But it worked. On the surface, progress was breathtaking. Shared lunar bases sprouted like mushrooms. The Artemis complex at the South Pole, a fusion of American habitats, Chinese power grids, and European greenhouses. By 2055, over 500 people lived there permanently, mining helium-3 and water ice. The Nemesis-derived technologies paid dividends. Advanced nuclear thermal tugs ferried cargo between Earth and the Moon with unprecedented efficiency. Mars followed in 2060 with the first IAC-sanctioned colony at Olympus Mons. 120 souls establishing greenhouses, 3D-printed domes, and fusion reactors fueled by asteroid-sourced deuterium. Thermonuclear fusion, perfected in the late 2040s from Nemesis's volatile ices and rare metals, ended Earth's energy wars overnight. No more oil embargoes or pipeline disputes. Global grids hummed with clean power. Poverty rates plummeted in developing nations, and climate recovery accelerated. It was the golden age of unity, or so the official narratives claimed. Beneath the shine, tensions simmered in the mundane. Colonial disputes over water rights on the Moon escalated into petty strikes among miners. Cultural clashes and mixed crews led to quiet resentments. American individualism chafing against Chinese collectivism. Russian pragmatism against European regulations. The IAC's bureaucracy amplified these, with endless audits and equity quotas that felt like shackles to some. Then came the Shadow War of 2062, a meticulously planned act of terror that nearly shattered everything. It started on February 7th, when anomalous signals pinged a fleet of IAC nuclear tugs in high Earth orbit. These were the workhorses of the solar economy, 14 vessels towing asteroid fragments for processing. Intelligence later traced the hack to a rogue state, a coalition of isolated regimes, bitter over exclusion from the IAC's resource bonanza. They had spent years infiltrating supply chains, embedding malware and software updates from a compromised subcontractor in Southeast Asia. At 14:32 UTC, the attack triggered. 10 tugs simultaneously overrode safety locks, firing their engines at full thrust toward populated orbits. Chaos unfolded in real time. Tug 7 slammed into a commercial satellite cluster, triggering a Kessler cascade. Debris fields expanding at 7 kilometers per second, shredding comms arrays and solar farms. Tug 4 veered toward the Lunar Gateway Station, forcing an emergency evacuation. 28 crew members exposed to vacuum, 11 dead from decompression injuries. Ground control watched helplessly as Tug 9 targeted the Artemis complex itself, its nuclear core rigged to overload on impact. Heroic interventions saved the day. A quick-thinking Russian operator in Moscow isolated Tug 9's network, forcing a manual shutdown via backup analog controls, a relic from Cold War designs. Chinese cyber teams flooded the malware with junk data, stalling 3 others. American drones rammed 2 more off course, sacrificing themselves in fiery collisions. By night's end, the fleet was neutralized, but at a cost: 47 lives lost, including 19 civilians on orbital habitats. Debris took months to clear, halting Mars shipments and causing economic ripples that triggered recessions in Asia and Europe. The aftermath exposed fractures. Accusations flew. Why hadn't IAC security caught the infiltration? Rogue states denied involvement, but forensic evidence led to swift UN sanctions and covert strikes that toppled 2 regimes. The IAC tightened controls, mandating triple redundant AI oversight and mandatory crew rotations to prevent insider threats. Yet the Shadow War forged deeper bonds. Shared grief united the powers. Public outrage demanded accountability. By 2070, humanity pushed harder outward, with Mars colonies doubling and fusion tech democratized. But the scars lingered, a reminder that unity, even in victory, was fragile. What if the next threat came from within? By the 2070s, the solar system no longer felt like frontier. It felt like home, crowded, unequal, and increasingly angry. Interplanetary trade had become the backbone of the global economy. Nemesis-derived water, platinum group metals, and rare volatiles flowed earthward in constant streams of automated tugs. Mars colonies grew to 12,000 permanent residents by 2080. Ceres became the industrial heart of the asteroid belt, with over 8,000 miners and processors living in rotating habitats. Fusion power was everywhere. Life expectancy on Earth climbed past 95. Infant mortality vanished in most nations. Poverty, at least the old kind, seemed like ancient history. But abundance bred new forms of scarcity. Skilled labor became the ultimate currency. Only a narrow slice of humanity, genetically screened, psychologically profiled, rigorously trained, could survive long-term in low-gravity, high-radiation environments. The rest stayed on Earth or in shielded orbital cities, dependent on colonial remittances. A new class system emerged: belters versus grounders. Earth citizens resented the space aristocracy who earned 10 times the median salary while risking their lives. Colonial workers resented Earth's endless regulatory oversight, environmental audits, and profit skimming by IAC corporations. Tensions boiled over on Ceres in 2085. It began with a seemingly trivial grievance: oxygen rationing during a routine maintenance shutdown. A Chinese-owned refinery delayed repairs to prioritize a high-value platinum shipment back to Earth. The delay stretched from 48 hours to 9 days. Oxygen levels in the main hab dropped to 18.7%. Several elderly residents, retired miners on fixed pensions, suffered hypoxia-induced strokes. 3 died. The funeral became a spark. Thousands gathered in Ceres' central atrium. What started as a silent vigil turned into chants, then thrown tools, then barricades. Miners seized control of the primary fusion reactor and life support nodes. They broadcast a single demand: one person, one vote, no more Earth vetoes. Within hours, the rebellion spread to 3 other belt stations. Over 4,000 workers downed tools, automated ore haulers were remotely locked. A dozen corporate security drones were shot down with improvised railguns. The IAC response was swift and brutal. A multinational rapid response force, American Marines, Chinese Space Marines, Russian Spetsnaz veterans, launched from lunar orbit within 72 hours. They arrived under full burn, no deceleration stealth. The first boarding action turned into a massacre. Microgravity firefight in the reactor corridors, flashbangs, ceramic flechettes, depressurization charges. 23 rebels and 9 troopers died in the initial breach alone. A secondary explosion, later attributed to a sabotaged coolant line, ruptured the main oxygen tank. Another 41 civilians suffocated before emergency bulkheads sealed. The images went viral: bodies floating in zero-G, blood globules drifting like crimson snow. A teenage welder clutching her father's corpse while screaming at the camera in broken Mandarin and English. Earth recoiled. Protests erupted in Shanghai, New York, Moscow. Politicians who had authorized the assault faced impeachment threats. The IAC was forced to the table. The Ceres Accord of 2086 granted limited self-governance to belt colonies, local councils with veto power over resource extraction quotas, mandatory profit sharing, and a permanent seat on the AIC Security Committee. It was hailed as a triumph of compromise, but the wounds never healed. The technologies once developed to deflect Nemesis, precision kinetic interceptors, autonomous swarms, High-yield nuclear shaping charges began appearing in black market arsenals. Small skirmishes flared over asteroid claims. A prospector hab vaporized in 2092, blamed on rogue kinetic debris. A European mining outpost crippled by directed energy sabotage in 2097. Each incident was denied, investigated, buried under layers of plausible deniability. Humanity had learned to deflect extinction-level threats from above. It was still learning how to stop itself from becoming the extinction-level threat from within. By the dawn of the 22nd century, humanity had outgrown its cradle. The technologies born from Nemesis 1, ultra-efficient nuclear thermal engines, antimatter-catalyzed fusion drives, self-replicating robotic miners, had matured into something far more audacious. In 2147, the first true interstellar probe, the Nemesis Horizon, departed the Kuiper Belt on an antimatter-boosted trajectory toward Proxima Centauri. It carried no crew, only AI successors to the original mission software, hardened against centuries of cosmic radiation. Launch mass, 42 tons. Cruise velocity, 0.14 c. Arrival estimated 2179. The probe was not alone for long. By 2160, dozens of follow-on craft fanned out toward nearby stars: Barnard Star, Wolf 359, Lalande 21185. Each carried seed factories, compact von Neumann machines designed to mine local asteroids, build habitats, and eventually construct relay stations for future human expeditions. The IAC had become the de facto steward of humanity's outward migration, coordinating launch windows, resource quotas, and ethical guidelines that grew longer and more contentious with every decade. Then, in 2182, everything changed. The Deep Space Array on Triton, a joint Russian-Chinese-European installation, detected an anomalous narrowband signal from the direction of the scattered disk, roughly 120 AU out. Not natural radio noise, not a glitch, a repeating mathematical sequence, prime numbers, followed by binary representations of hydrogen, helium, carbon, oxygen, the universal building blocks of life. It lasted 47 minutes, then fell silent. The discovery ignited global debate. Was it an ancient beacon, a derelict probe, a deliberate message? The IAC convened an emergency contact committee. For the first time in over a century, the old powers set aside protocol and moved with genuine urgency. A rapid response vessel, the Unity Dawn, fastest ship ever built, capable of 0.22 c using staged antimatter pulses, was dispatched in 2184. It reached the source in 2191, a dark kilometer-scale object drifting in a highly eccentric orbit. Not an asteroid, a ship, or what remained of one. The derelict was ancient. Carbon dating of surface micrometeorite pitting suggested at least 800,000 years of exposure. No power signature, no active emissions. Hull material, an unknown metallic alloy that resisted every spectroscopic probe. But the interior told a story. Robotic scouts entered through a breached equatorial airlock. They found corridors lined with crystalline data storage lattices still faintly glowing under residual radiation. Holographic archives, when deciphered over the next decade, revealed images of a bipedal species with iridescent skin and six-fingered hands, cities floating in gas giant atmospheres, fleets of ships departing dying worlds, and then silence. The last time-stamped record, a catastrophic stellar flare that sterilized their home system. No weapons, no signs of war, just quiet extinction. The philosophical shock was profound. Humanity stared at its possible future, a civilization that reached for the stars, only to be erased by cosmic indifference. Debates raged in every language and every colony. Should we attempt revival of their technology, Risk reverse engineering artifacts that might carry dormant pathogens? Or quarantine the wreck and simply watch? By 2198, the first human expedition arrived. A mixed crew of 42 descendants of the original Accord nations established a research station around the derelict. They named it Echo. Within 2 years, hybrid human-xeno propulsion concepts emerged, drives that mimicked the alien lattice geometry, promising velocities approaching 0.4 c. The golden age of expansion truly began. By 2200, seed ships had reached over 30 nearby systems. Small outposts dotted habitable worlds and promising moons. Earth itself became a museum planet, beautiful, stable, increasingly empty as the young and ambitious left for the frontier. Yet the question lingered in every habitat, every command deck, every quiet moment under alien skies. Were we spared the fate of Echo's builders because we learned cooperation in time? Or were we merely delayed, waiting for the next indifferent rock, flare, or silence to remind us how small we still are? Every timeline branches. The Nemesis 1 crisis forced humanity onto one path, but what if small choices had gone differently? Here are the 3 most plausible forks, from luminous utopia to self-inflicted collapse, and the quiet, realistic middle ground that feels truest to our nature. Best-case trajectory: the harmonious federation post-2150. The Echo derelict becomes humanity's greatest teacher. Instead of greed or fear, the discovery sparks a genuine philosophical awakening. Ethical frameworks for contact are codified into IAC law by 2205. No reverse engineering without consensus, no weaponization of xenotech, mandatory representation of all colonies in decision-making. The Ceres Accord evolves into full interplanetary suffrage. By 2250, a loose but genuine galactic federation emerges. Earth as cultural archive, Mars as industrial core, belt worlds as innovation hubs, outer system outposts as frontier beacons. Antimatter sails carry colony ships to habitable exoplanets at 0.45 c. First extrasolar human child is born in 2287 on a world orbiting Tau Ceti. Contact protocols wait patiently. No reply comes from Echo's builders or anyone else. But humanity no longer asks, "Are we alone?" It asks, "How do we deserve to not be?" Unity, born in terror, becomes chosen habit. The species endures not because it had to, but because it learned it could. Worst-case trajectory: fracture and collapse by 2200. The shadow war of 2062 never truly ends. It mutates. Black market nemesis deflection tech proliferates. In 2094, a rogue consortium of excluded states detonates a shaped nuclear charge inside a disputed asteroid, claiming resource sovereignty. The blast shatters the object into a debris swarm that cripples cislunar traffic for a decade. Retaliation follows. Kinetic strikes, cyber sabotage of fusion grids, targeted assassinations of colony governors. By 2110, the IAC fractures along old lines, a Sino-Russian bloc, an Anglo-European sphere, independent belt coalitions. Mars declares neutrality, but secretly arms itself. In 2173, a defensive antimatter test misfires near Jupiter, igniting a cascading EMP that blinds half the inner system's sensors. Accusations spiral into open conflict. By 2998, the solar system is a patchwork of armed habitats and dead zones. Interstellar dreams die stillborn. Seed ships rust in parking orbits. Humanity survives, barely, reduced to a few million souls clinging to domed cities, forever scarred by the lesson that external threats unite us only until the threat recedes. Most plausible middle path: fragile continuity with creeping complacency. Reality rarely chooses extremes. The Federation never fully materializes. The IAC remains a creaky, compromise-ridden bureaucracy. Echo's relics are studied cautiously, yielding incremental advances but no miracles. Expansion continues, slow, expensive, uneven. By 2200, there are outposts in 30 systems, but most colonists are second or third generation, born into debt to Earth corporations. Inequality persists. Ground dwellers live comfortably on fusion abundance, while belters and extrasolar pioneers scrape by on recycled air and rationed dreams. The great fear is not war or extinction, it's stagnation. Humanity grows accustomed to safety. Early warning telescopes watch for more nemesis-like threats, but public interest wanes. Budgets for deep space exploration are quietly cut in favor of comfortable orbital habitats. The species endures, spreads, prospers modestly, and slowly forgets why it ever had to unite in the first place. What ties all three futures together is the central, uncomfortable truth. Humanity needed an external sword of Damocles to force cooperation. Absent Nemesis 1, would we have built the Accord? Would we have shared fusion secrets, pooled launch infrastructure, risked joint crews? Or would we still be squabbling over lunar helium-3 rights while the next Apophis-like rock silently approaches? The story of Nemesis 1 is not really about asteroids. It is about whether profound change requires existential terror, or whether we can choose it freely before the sky forces our hand. We've walked a long road together, from a single silent point of light caught by a telescope in Chile in 2029, through panic, petty bickering, heroic sacrifice, fragile unity, betrayal from within, expansion across the solar system, and finally the quiet shock of finding another civilization's grave marker drifting in the dark. Nemesis 1 never struck Earth, but in this timeline, it struck something deeper, the illusion that humanity could keep postponing real cooperation until the last possible second. Now, standing here in our actual year, 2026, we look at the sky with clearer eyes. Real asteroids are already on our risk lists. Apophis will make its closest approach in 2029, harmless but close enough to remind us. 2024 YR4 briefly spiked concern before better data eased the odds. Bennu, Dimorphos, 10-1955, they're all being watched. NASA's NEO Surveyor is on track for launch soon. China's Planetary Defense Program is accelerating. The Artemis Accords are growing, slowly pulling more nations into shared lunar and deep space norms. But the machinery is still fragmented. Budgets fight yearly battles. Geopolitical distrust lingers. Public attention drifts to the next election cycle, the next climate headline, the next crisis closer to home. We are doing many of the right things, just not fast enough, not together enough, and not with the urgency a true kilometer-scale threat would demand. The Nemesis timeline offers brutal clarity. Lesson 1. Detection alone is not enough. We need deflection demonstrated, repeatedly, on progressively larger targets. DART was a brilliant first step. The next ones must come sooner, bigger, multinational. Lesson 2. Binding international agreements matter more than ever. The Planetary Defense Accord was born in panic. We don't have to wait for panic. Expand the Artemis Accords into full planetary defense commitments. Include binding resource-sharing clauses for deflection missions. Make vetoes costly. Lesson 3. Unity forged by fear is real, but brittle. The moment the rock misses, old habits creep back, unless we deliberately embed cooperation into institutions, incentives, and culture. Make space the one domain where rivalry becomes collaboration by design. Lesson 4. The small things kill progress as surely as the big ones. Weather delays, subcontractor glitches, cultural sniping in crews, budget audits. They nearly doomed the mission more than any asteroid could. Fix the mundane now. And the hardest question of all, can we lift our eyes to the sky without a rock forcing us to? Or will we need our own nemesis, whether stone, virus, climate tipping point, or something we haven't named yet, to finally decide that survival is more important than winning? I don't know the answer, but I know this. The longer we wait to choose unity, the narrower the margin for error becomes. If this story moved you, if it made you think differently about our shared future in space, do two small things right now. Hit that like button. It tells the algorithm this kind of deep, long-form what-if matters. Subscribe and turn on notifications. There are many more timelines waiting, some hopeful, some terrifying, all built on the fragile, stubborn, beautiful thing we call humanity. Thank you for spending this hour with me. Look up tonight. We still have time, but not forever.